This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome everybody to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning we will be holding the second part of our investigation on violence against women and girls and the impact on young people in London. And I think it's very timely, really. Many of us will have seen the sentencing yesterday of Kyle Clifford and that absolutely tragic incident to the Hunt family, and I'm sure our hearts go out to the friends and family left of the Hunt family. Going forward, we'll be referring to violence against women and girls as VAUG. So anybody watching, that is what it stands for. Please, can you make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? And can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies today from Assembly Member Moema and Assembly Member Lord Bailey, for whom Assembly Member Prince is attending as a substitute.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of February 2025 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Can we note the completed, ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Thank you. And can we note the response received from the Metropolitan Police Service to the committee's report, Preventing Violence and Protecting Young People? Excellent. So now we move on to our main item of business. I'd like to welcome our guest, Detective Assistant Commissioner Alexis Boone from the Met Police, Detective Chief Superintendent Angela Craggs, sorry, it's Craggs, forgive me, Will Balakrishnan, Director of Commissioning and Partnerships, Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, Jane Lemon, Head of Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls for the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, and Lee Peck, the Director of Violence Reduction Unit, known as the VRU. Good morning, welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for coming. So I'm going to start the questions. These are aimed at all of you, and as it's the first question, you all might want to answer, but going forward, don't all feel that you all have to answer to all questions. In your experience, how would you describe young people's experience of VOG in London? Shall I start with you, Alexis?
Yes, no problem at all. So the experience of young people is very much linked to the experience of adults in London as well. And if you look at VOG generally, the College of Policing and the MPC estimate that 3,000 VOG offences are recorded a day across the country, and 1 in 12 women are victims each year, which is pretty substantial. And that impacts families, individuals. It's truly a huge impact across society. In terms of young people, we do see in our statistics that, of course, young people are impacted. But if you look at VOG generally, it impacts across all age ranges, across all demographics. It's pretty indiscriminate. But I know the committee is obviously very focused on the younger element here. But we do see a fair proportion of younger people drawn into this, whether it's child abuse or whether it's caught up in VOG itself. So it is a pretty endemic problem for us, a real challenge, and one we need to work together with partners on.
Yes, it's been noted as being a national emergency, and we are concentrating in this particular committee on younger people.
Yes.
Angela, do you have anything else to add?
Just to add to that, I absolutely agree that the experience of young people, living in families where they're experiencing domestic abuse, for example.
Angela, so sorry to interrupt you. Could you get slightly closer to the microphone? Because I'm having trouble hearing you, and possibly others the same. Thank you so much.
Is that better?
Yeah, that is better. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Certainly when we're speaking about young people that live in households that are experiencing domestic abuse and violence, we know it's very important to work with our wider statutory partners in order to safeguard children, and also to put their experiences and their voice at the centre of how we then deal with that set circumstances with them. We're very, very aware of the different experiences that young people might have, particularly in the online space as well. So it's really, really important that we are able to build partnerships with some of those providers in order that we can safeguard young people and stay ahead of the curve. We see different opportunities within that space. And the other thing to say is the experience of young people in exploitation as well. And there's a lot of things that we've done in policing to tackle the criminal and the sexual exploitation of children and young people. So we continue to put their voice at the heart of what we do, and we work with our lead responsible officers in victim and safeguarding around building opportunities for them to join victims' forums, for example, so that we can hear from them and put the appropriate safeguards in place.
Thank you. Will?
I know the committee heard lots last time, part one of this, from different organisations. I won't add to that too much, but one that really sort of struck with me from all the surveys and all the data that we know about it was a girls' attitude survey that Girl Guiding did last year, which said that 3 in 4 girls aged 11 to 16 see or experience sexism. That increases to 95% of 17 to 21-year-olds. 47% of 11 to 21-year-olds feel less safe as a result of that sexism. 77% of girls and young women have experienced online harm in the last year, and 63% of girls had experienced sexism at school, college or university in their daily life. I just think, you know, it was described as endemic last time, I think. I mean, it's incredibly pervasive.
Thank you. Jane.
Thank you. I suppose my addition really is the dearth of services for young people when they do experience forms of VOG. There's not enough services across VOG, full stop. But then there are particular groups, young people being one of those groups that do not have the level of service provision that they should have. The other thing I will talk about is the information that's coming through to us from children and young people is around the societal changes that are happening now. There's a pushback on equality, in a sense, and boys being pushed towards a view of what masculinity should be and their perception of what it is for young women and girls to be to them. And that's becoming quite difficult and a bit of a worry, well, a big worry, actually, and proliferates itself in society, physically, but definitely in the online space. There is a real worry there. So I think young people's experiences of VOG this is kind of like a bit of a new era. Some things are becoming more entrenched and leaking out into physical environments.
Yeah, I recognise that. I agree with that. Lib.
Yeah, thank you. We did a strategic needs assessment across London of some of the patterns of violence back in 2020 when we'd just been set up, and we're just on the point of actually publishing the next 5 years later. And what we know from the information we're getting there, that is on the rise in terms of young women getting involved in exploitation, in terms of gangs, and that, I suppose, bears out some of the comments that have been made by the panel about the rise of that. I think there's also both evidence and experiential evidence to suggest that the online harm, as Will has referred to the particular survey, you know, is a really pernicious part of that. We've seen the influence of, you know, kind of Tate brothers, and we've felt when we've been speaking to teachers and other, you know, celebrity kind of figureheads, as it were, online, when we've spoken to teachers and when we've spoken to young people that we work closely with, that is really being felt in terms of the misogyny that's being directed towards young women. So it's really important, I think, that we recognise that, and we're doing a lot of work, which I'm sure we'll come on to, in that online space to recognise that evil that is really, I think, helping to fuel a lot of the violence against girls and young women. I think there is something as well that we just need to recognise, which again we might come on to, is that when we're talking about young women, there are lots of different intersectional experiences there. We know, for example, young black women are more adversely affected just in terms of the proportion, and we need to make sure that we have a message that talks about, I suppose, how all young people are impacted, but also one that is sensitive to many of the underlying factors that are hitting other communities differently. So, yes, it's not a good picture, I don't think, in terms of how, as a society, we are moving in terms of you know, the impact of our culture on violence against women and girls. And that's why we, as a preventative early intervention body, are doing a lot about trying to change that culture and experience.
Yep, and you referred to it as being evil, and I agree with you. So for anybody watching, in the 12 months to the end of January 2025, reported sexual offences in London have increased by 7.4%. Rape has increased by 2.2% compared to the previous 12 months. In a report to the London Policing Board in September last year, the Met reported that stalking and harassment made up 25% of the total VOG offences, which was 37,500. What sort of work is underway to address that in particular, and what percentage of a reduction would you think was acceptable going going forward? I know nothing is acceptable, but we have to look at what we're aiming for. What are we looking for, figure-wise?
Yeah, it's a difficult picture, isn't it? So essentially, first, we know this VORG is underreported, across all different age ranges, all different communities. And in the first instance, I think success is seeing an increase in reporting so that we can tackle it more effectively, deal with the underlying causes. Of course, over time, we want to see, as we get the increase in reporting, we then reduce off the back of that. So I think we see it like a bell curve in some ways, that we want to increase reporting to then reduce. But in the first instance, we want to get more reporting, and we need to encourage that. In terms of what we're doing and how we're addressing, I guess the challenge is your key question as well. We've got lots of things. We've done a lot in the Met around our capability, capacity, our culture, and the way we prioritise VORG, essentially. So just to go into a few examples of what we've done in the Met and how we're tackling the problem. We've got the V100, which prioritises the most dangerous men.
Yep.
And make sure that actually we look at a kind of a holistic approach to them. So, for example, we might be arresting them for VORG offences, we might be looking at arresting them for other offences, Achilles heels, or disrupting them with orders. There's all sorts of different tactics, but fundamentally we are there to disrupt and stop them committing more crimes or crimes against women and girls. To give you a sense, we've arrested 143 people for 1,246 offences. 117 of those have been charged with a total of 574 offences. 60 subjects were charged with VORG offences, including rape and GBH, non-fatal strangulation and attempted murder, so really serious offences. And what we've also done in the Met, if you remember, Dame Angelini made some recommendations around investigation of sexual offences. We've built a new standard operating procedure to give our officers guidance around how to investigate all sexual offences. So VORG 100 obviously is dealing with that high threat element, but also we want to make sure that we generally improve our investigation of all sexual offences across the board, because some can be preparatory, there can be a pattern of escalation with offenders. We've also piloting in the Met the DAPOs, so that's the Domestic Abuse Protection Orders, and so far we've got 44 of those to date, and we're prosecuting breaches of those. So that's a new government initiative to put some controls around some of the DA, so domestic abuse offenders. We are also listening more. So I talked about culture as well. We've set up our own VORG independent advisory group to, when we're creating policies, when we're thinking about how we're going to tackle this, to actually get views of a cross-section of society. So this is made up of people from different sectors, survivors, all sorts of different viewpoints and perspectives. It took a long time to assemble, but we've got some really good voices, different voices in the room, questioning, querying how we progress. And we've introduced scrutiny at a level not previously seen. So we've launched a scrutiny panel for our VORG cases. They review domestic abuse, stalking, harmful practices, all those areas that and challenge us around how we're investigating, how we're progressing those. So, and we can build some of those discussions then into continuous professional development of our officers.
Yeah.
Do you want me to pause there for?
If you can pause, because some of these questions are going to be. But very, very briefly, I mean, there's 2 points here. The current available data is very, very patchy, and we always talk about underreporting. But I've been on this committee for 8 years, and the figures go up and up. And everybody said, well, because people are reporting more. And you get to a point and you think, well, hang on, the figures are all going up and up and up. And the comment frequently comes back, and I'm sure it's true, but nevertheless, it grates a bit when we keep hearing, oh, yeah, but it's only going up because people are reporting more. The figures are still going up. So are you hopeful that these figures will start to come down?
Well, we're committed to the government's mission of trying to halve VORG, because that's where they want to go. But in the first instance, we have the figures I quoted of that 3,000. I mean, it's massive. It's truly, as we said again, endemic. And actually, fundamentally, we need to sort of change the way we treat women and girls as a society. I think. You know, we're not going to solve this. Our aim is to give people confidence when they come forward that they'll be taken seriously. We will support them. We've got a victim-centric, a survivor-centric approach, and we go after the offenders. So we're offender-focused. We really make sure we do everything we can to mitigate the threat that offender poses to that woman and to society. So, you know, it's not one we're going to solve, but we've got a clear, in our mind, we're very clear, supporting victims and going after the offenders. That's where we're aimed at, and improving confidence of people to report.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Has anybody got anything different to add to that? Lib.
I don't know when you want to take it, but obviously we're doing a lot of work in the early intervention and prevention space and a lot of connection with young people, and so I can talk about those interventions, but it might you may not feel that's appropriate at the moment.
I'll give us time at the end so that if any of you got anything that you haven't been able to say, that you can then say it then.
I just wondered if it might be helpful on the data, because you know you're absolutely right about the underreporting, but then you're absolutely right about, well, what baseline does that give us then? I actually think that with VORG, maybe the crime survey for England and Wales, which is more about people's experiences, which gives quite a good estimate of prevalence, might actually arguably be a better way to track what VORG offending looks like in the country. And, yeah, that's probably a better baseline. I think in terms of which crimes you might want to see down, well, I mean, I know government at the moment are thinking about a VORG strategy which is going to be cross-departmental, and I understand there's consideration for, well, could femicide be the top-line measure? Because that is something which probably isn't underreported, but probably we can see causality to the other VORG crimes underneath, and therefore, whilst everything else is maybe U-shaped, you might be able to set that as actually a target which could come down, because, you know, thankfully that's not underreported.
Thank you, because from a scrutiny point of view, we need to be able to scrutinise properly. Assembly Member Duval, do you want to come in on this?
It's a question to the MPS. Historically, consistency in approach from different levels of your organisation has been an issue. If I walk into police station X, or if I contact you on Y, how do I know that I'm getting a consistent service around that? So what steps in your overall review and the new documents coming back, how are you going to show me that actually this is how we're going to do reach consistency for people that come into contact with you?
Well, we know it's really important as part of our mission to build trust and confidence across London is to ensure that first response by officers or staff to any member of the public that's seeking help. So as part of the new Met for London training that we're rolling out across the Met Police, first responder training is absolutely key within that. So we're using some of the Statutory training, so first responder to victims of rape and serious sexual offences, but also taking that slightly further to incorporate domestic abuse as well. And although the training is aimed at certain thematic areas, it's aimed at building that ability for officers to empathise with members of the public. So it's really, really important that from that very first point of contact, whether that's a phone call into METCC, or, as you say, walk into the police station to report something that's happened, that they get that consistent response. And then in terms of the secondary investigation, you know, the Commissioner's committed to putting in an additional 465 police officers into areas of public protection that need it. So therefore, we're able to improve the quality of the response, improve the training of those officers, and therefore build consistency into the delivery.
But sorry, how is that? How intrusive is supervision to ensure that consistency? Look, the Friday, Saturday night, and I'm on response, and I get a very difficult violence against women response. Am I going to be able to spend the time dealing with that? Because sometimes it's complex, it takes time. I think it's quite clear on rape and issues of that, but on other crimes at different peaks and troughs, that's where consistency goes, doesn't it? And the response goes. How I treat the victim might dip or not dip. We're all you're all professionals, and we all aim for a standard. But also, where is that in terms of supervisory, and who's keeping an eye on those on the front line delivering that service?
Yeah, part of the training is obviously for supervisors as well.
Right.
So they're all part and parcel. It's the frontline responders that we've invested a lot of time in. So I think it's about 13,000, isn't it, that have received the training so far. Because you've got to have that quality of supervision absolutely at the front line. You're absolutely right. And also, we've also increased the number of experienced detective sergeants by quite a large number in the public protection unit. So what you have is the first layer of supervision from the frontline sergeant that's looking at what their officers are doing, how they're doing it, the recording of the crime, the initial investigation, and then the backup is we've put some very experienced detective sergeants into public protection now that are doing the secondary, if you like, supervision and reassuring ourselves that we've done everything we possibly could. And there's a feedback loop between the two, that actually if the initial response is not good, that will get fed back and vice versa. So we've invested quite heavily in the front line because we know that actually a lot of cases and the confidence of victims and survivors can be lost in that very first contact. So that's why we put a lot of focus on that. Thank you.
Can I just quickly ask you, what's the average caseload of these detectives? How many?
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work around caseloads across public protection and VORG investigations. So the average is something around 17 per officer, which is where we feel confident they're able to offer the best response to victims.
Has that gone down?
That's reduced.
Because it was very, very bad at one point.
It's gone down dramatically, but that's just putting sheer capacity and experience into the system. So we've made conscious choices in the Met to invest in our public protection and the VORG space to make sure that we can provide that capacity, because we know that investigators were overloaded with crimes previously, and also it impacts our attrition of our people, because if you're faced with what are quite traumatic, difficult incidents to investigate and volume, that is not a good place to be. So we've consciously made that, but it's come down dramatically, yes.
Okay, is it where you want it to be now?
I think it's there or thereabouts, but of course not all cases are equal in terms of...
No, I know. Some of them are very, very complex.
Very, very complex.
And you take that into consideration on their caseloads?
Yeah, well, we do have... so if you had a linked series or something very complex, there are specialist crime detectives that we can escalate matters to and make sure that they support. So it's a whole Met effort, really.
Yeah. OK, thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. My question is to the Met. It is about what work has been done to ensure the safe reporting pathways for all migrant victims and witnesses against young women and girls, and what do you think is needed in addition to what you're doing at the moment?
No, that's an absolutely really good point, and we know that we want victims to feel confident to come forward and report to the police. This is a national issue, and that's been the challenge for us, and we've, in the Met, been at the forefront of some sort of developments that are taking place nationally with the MPCC lead in this area.
Yeah, I think you hit the absolute nail on the head, really, around confidence to report. Because I think it's out there. You can see the current MPCC policy as it is. That needs to be reviewed. We'll contribute to that. We've done some thinking and some work with stakeholders in London, but repeatedly the people in the VORG sector, survivors, victims, are telling us this is an issue. We do recognise it, and we're going to try and work with it, but we need to work with the MPCC nationally and with government, really, I think, to resolve this. This isn't something that we can resolve overnight, but we absolutely recognise the importance and the part that plays in people coming forward or people being, having that confidence to report, but it's absolutely on our priority list.
I'm going to ask you a question, but if I may, Chair, I'd quite like the comments from other members of the panel as well. So, as you are all aware, in 2018, both Liberty and Southall Black Sisters raised what was referred to as a super complaint against the police about sharing the information of people who, for example, people who come forward, women who come forward, and their immigration status was shared with the Home Office. The response from His Majesty, well, it was Her Majesty's Inspectorate at the time, but His Majesty's Inspectorate was that there needed to be adjustments made regarding data sharing pathways, and effectively people needed to be protected. I wonder what, and the original super complaint was about a firewall, about making sure that that information didn't go through, and it effectively didn't stop people coming forward to make complaints about criminal acts. Wonder what your response to that is. Do you feel that a firewall is necessary?
Sorry, you're addressing that to us, or did you want to hear from
So I'm going to address it to you first, and then I'm going to ask the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I think we need to come to some arrangements that give people confidence to come forward. We are absolutely clear that if you're coming forward and you're reporting a rape, that is the most important thing to deal with and protect you, to look after you, to support you, to make sure that the person that's perpetrated that against you is brought to justice. We're really clear that is our primary goal and aim. The MPCC policy at the moment does talk about obviously sharing data with the Home Office. It talks about delays to it and in certain circumstances, but it does still seem to suggest that you do need to provide some data sometimes. But we recognise it. I think it needs a clearer position for policing generally, clarity on this. So I think we've just got to work that through, I think. So, but it's just getting an arrangement that is, that gives people confidence, that supports what we're trying to do, and actually, supports our primary objectives.
But, sorry, when you say that you're having conversations and those are arrangements that need to be worked through, what kind of conversations are taking place, and is there going to be a resolution to this at some point soon?
Yeah, so it's not something that policing can solve entirely on its own. That's the issue here. But to give you reassurance, and I'll let other partners come in as well, but in London we're having those conversations, we've been doing the thinking, we've been working out how we could work our way around this really difficult problem and make some recommendations and support the national work. So I'll obviously bring other partners in. I'm sure Jane and others will want to comment on that, just to give you assurance that we are joined up on that and we are thinking about that.
OK, thank you. And so anyone else on the panel, would you like to respond to that? Jane?
Yeah, hi. It's as Alexis says, we have been working quite closely with the Met. We've advocated for a number of years the necessity for a firewall, because we have anecdotal information about women who are deliberately just not going to the police, just not reporting, not only to the police, they don't want to go to social services, they don't want to go anywhere because they're so frightened about being outed in terms of their immigration status. This is a national issue, but in the absence of any national activity, I'm glad to see that there is national activity now, but in the absence of that, we have been having conversations for quite a few years now, trying to move this forward, to the extent that I've had conversations with international partners, because there are good examples across the world, not loads of them, but good solid examples that you can reach into, get information from, and see how that can be translated across to the London experience. So I think it is it's a very, very knotty issue. Just when you think you might have solved a section of it, something else comes up. So it sounds a bit glib to say there are ongoing conversations, but there are, and we are feeding into the national picture. We're also working with, as well as working with victims and survivors and groups that support those victims and survivors. We're also working with our GLA migration team, and we're part of a group that have set up a research project, the migration team and leading on it. But we're also supporting them with the Vorg lens, so ensuring that the research project does a deep dive into the experiences of migrant survivors and the types of barriers they're coming up against, and gives us current ideas about how we can get over all these barriers and these challenges and feed up into the national picture.
Thank you, and I am aware that the Mayor has been lobbying for this change as well for a long time. Yeah. And thank you, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, for making the point that actually it is, for example, the rape that is the important issue here. And of course, we want to encourage people to come forward because of what's happened to them, but to also prevent it happening to somebody else as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Garrett. Roberts, beg your pardon.
Thank you. It's just following on from the firewall issue. I understand that the firewall was called for by HMIC FRS back in 2020, rejected by the Home Office at the time in December 2021. MOPAC wants it. We've heard that the Mayor wants it. The Met appear to give qualified support. Would that be fair?
We want to work through a solution that gives people the confidence to come forward, but also meets the need of the government as well in terms of immigration and other aspects. So there's got to be a way through this. There has to be a way through this, and that supports victims fundamentally. There must be a way.
Yeah. So ultimately the question is, given that we hear a lot from the Mayor at the moment about how he's looking forward to working with a new government that wants to work with the Mayor, that wants to work with MOBET, that wants to work with the capital, not against. What conversations have been had since the new government has come in with the Home Office since July of last year to drive this agenda forward?
I think at the political level, since last year, those conversations have taken place in terms of conversations with our Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, as well, so Sophie Linden. I'm not clear if our current Deputy Mayor has had those conversations specifically on the firewall, though she has had conversations on violence against women and girls in general. We met with Jess Phillips and we talked about the government's ambition on VORG and all that we are doing in London and what we could do to support the agenda, because we all want to see a reduction. The firewall was probably touched on, but not in depth there. But it is something that, just to give everybody confidence and clarity, it is an absolutely key element of the work that we are doing from a MOPAC perspective in the VORG team and working with our partners to ensure that everybody has access to support, service provision, whatever, regardless of their immigration status.
Okay. Do you think it might be possible to get written update on conversations or letters or the update on this particular issue? As I say, I mean, I can quite understand that the previous government, which had their own views on immigration, then those views may have changed under the new Home Office. So it would be useful to know precisely. We're nearly a year in to the new government, so it would be good to know what has changed, if anything.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. You've also obviously got the opportunity to ask the Deputy Mayor once in a while when she's in this chair as well. I just think the other thing to add is Louisa Rolfe, who was formerly of Assistant Commissioner of the Met and former national lead at the MPCC for tackling violence against women and girls, was a big supporter of trying to work through a solution, as DAC has indicated. So I think it's very helpful that her role at the moment is going to facilitate that, and we've obviously been having a lot of conversations with her about this prior to her departure. So there's also conversations at official level that happen, and I meet regularly with colleagues in the Home Office, as you can imagine. This is something that's being worked on as well as what the government are doing more broadly around a VORG strategy. So I just want to assure you that things are happening. It just, I think, as Alexis described, it is knotty, but it's not for want of trying.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Garbett.
Morning. I know it's kind of implicit to what we're talking about, but obviously this lack of firewall becomes a tool of abuse from perpetrators who use it towards the people that they're abusing. So I don't know, I know you mentioned, Jane, that you're working with organisations, but I just don't know what the advice is to women in this situation or what groups are doing to kind of, I know they're often at the end of the line and are kind of supporting women in really complex situations, but it's just it's adding to the issue.
Yeah, it's a good question, but it's really difficult to answer because there's a lot of pieces in play in order for that victim to want to come forward and to report. I think the key thing for us is it's two-pronged. We need to work with government, with organisations like the Met, with MPCC and so on, to ensure there is this firewall established. But at the other side of things is that we really do need to make sure that there is support to victims and survivors, and so we do our best to make sure in our service provision that nobody's left out. We've got we're funding Southall Black Sisters and others around this particular issue, and we're also funding that's through the Mayor's VORG fund, through the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation Programme. We're funding some agencies there to do similar service provision. They're all overwhelmed, as you can imagine, but that's all we can do. We really do need a national push on this.
Thank you. Yeah, because I've been to see Southall Black Sisters and they talk about that dynamic of women with no recourse to public funds and unable to report and do describe themselves as the end of the road. So, yeah, the more support we can give them, the better. Thanks.
May I come in there? Just to say, absolutely clear for us, we want it reported. The main concern is protecting, supporting and bringing offenders to justice. The immigration is a secondary matter. We can work our way through these things. We can come up with something. We can work with the Home Office. We can deal with these issues. I just really want to encourage people to come forward. That our primary concern is protecting people.
Thank you. We're now moving on to another section, and this is about what action the Mayor has taken on VORG. So, really, this is to the Met and MOPAC. What specific progress has been made since the publication of the Mayor's current VORG strategy in 2022 in preventing and reducing VORG, and how on the Met, basically how are the Met and MOPAC working together on this specifically? Let's start with Alexis. Let's start with you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, we do work obviously very closely with MOPAC on the strategy, and they support in many ways, which I'm sure they'll outline themselves. But and Jane will outline, and Lib will. But certainly with VORG, we've worked really hard, as I mentioned, around using V100 to prioritise. We've piloting new orders. We've increased training. We've increased capacity in our teams. And we are working, things around schools and working in schools and supporting them, delivering the right message and insight in schools, certainly working with MOPAC on that. And we've done our own things as well. But also, use of technology, we've really accelerated lots of things in the Met. If you take live facial recognition, that has been pretty dramatic in tackling VORG. So we've had 50 individuals involved in VORG offences, arrested and including strangulation and stalking and domestic abuse generally, and 50 sex offenders as well stopped and found to be in breach of their conditions. So we're using technology as well, but there are so many things we're doing, and MOPAC are supporting around intervention as well.
And how do they support you?
So in terms of a lot of it's around commissioning the right services to support victims, and also supporting us around intervention with schools. If I bring Jane probably in there, it's probably helpful to come from the MOPAC perspective, if you don't mind.
So in terms of how we support the Met, it's exactly as Alexis says. I'd say in addition we use our oversight function as well, and we're present at their key meeting around public protection and VORG, and we offer constructive advice, or we comment in the way that the Met are delivering their end of business. But we are, I'd say, very close partners. We make sure that we meet regularly to understand what's happening, both from a MOPAC perspective but also from a Metropolitan Police perspective. If I can turn to the original question, which was what's the Mayor done on VORG? So he's invested 233.
Yeah, no, we're coming to questions on it. That's the whole section. This was mainly how you work together. Tell me,
if I just come in, I think Jane's done herself a bit of a disservice, if you don't mind, Chair. I think MOPAC's been a big part of working with the Met through New Met for London and the commitment to VORG that was made there. to providing the evidence base and the lived experience of Londoners to help inform that, and the last Vaughan strategy that the Met wrote. We facilitated the Met in some excellent conversations, I'm thinking with the former DAC, where we brought together all of London councils, every BCU commander and us, for a really energetic day about how to tackle Vaughan locally. I just think there's
no, I'm sure there is. Tell me then, when you commission, because obviously you've got a lot of money, as has Lib, when you commission different services, do you talk to the Met about where they would like some money put into, or do you tell them?
No, we don't tell them. As I say, whilst we oversee the Met, we also work in partnership with them, and tackling Vaughan is one of those areas where we're doing both simultaneously. If you think about the way the Vaughan strategy is structured, two of those sections are about victims and perpetrators. So our perpetrator work, if you think, for example, of a recent piece of commissioning on GPS tags for non-DA stalkers, which we launched last year with the MOJ, we can't be successful in delivering that unless we design it from first principles with the Met, and that's one of probably the most causal interventions that we have. If we think about IOM, which is tackling domestic abusers and preventing reoffending in that space, again, probably one of the single biggest causal interventions that we have across the system. We can't design that if we don't work with the Met. That's what IOM is.
Yeah, no, I get that. But I was told once that actually when the Met would like some money put into some commissioning, that it doesn't always go that way, that the commissioners do what they want to do and then the Met work with them. So I'm hoping you're going to tell me that that's
absolutely
not true.
I wonder if that was prior to me. To be honest,
You've been there
in the last
forever,
4.5 years, in the last 4.5 years, I've met with the Met on commissioning as a topic. I used to have a forum when I first started to do it with them. There isn't a single piece of commissioning that's happened that hasn't been discussed with and informed by the needs of the Met. That doesn't mean we always acquiesce to everything.
No, I was just...
But nothing happens in isolation. If it has a direct interface into the criminal justice system, it's also agreed with the CPS. It's also agreed. Hopefully that's not the case anymore.
No, hopefully it isn't. I was looking for assurance. And with the commissioning, does the Met come to you and say we really need help with money in a particular direction, or do you tell the Met where it goes?
Okay, so we would use evidence, data, and we'd use experience to look at where we think we needed to be commissioning programmes. We have enough regular kind of connection with the Met to both inform them and also to seek their views on different programmes that we're going to be investing in. I wouldn't say that every single piece of commissioning that we do would go through the Met, and certainly we don't have the same relationship with the Met as obviously MOPAC does in terms of the statutory oversight and therefore the ability of handling the Met's budget and thinking about where they want to deploy resources. But what we will do, for example, is I made reference earlier to the strategic needs assessment that we are doing with the Metropolitan Police. That will flush out where we think there needs to be extra areas of investment, and that's the way we would work. And then in the early intervention prevention space, which obviously the police are a key partner of, but not the only partner, we would be working with health and working with education, and we'd be making sure they were absolutely on top of the schools and the family work that we're doing.
The reason I ask is because I have been told this on several occasions by various different people, and given that the Met is now going to have to cope with less money and we've got an epidemic here, if the Commissioner came to you and said we need X amount of million on a specific thing because that would really help, would you be all ears, or is that not something that you would countenance?
I mean, he hasn't and wouldn't, because he'd go to MOPAC. But are you asking, am I receptive to partners and thinking about how we build that into commissioning? Absolutely. And we would do exactly the same when we hear from local authorities, and we do exactly the same when we hear from health.
Okay, that's
it's a partnership approach, and it's really important that we draw on their experience and where they're seeing gaps alongside using the evidence that we do.
Okay. Did you
Could
want to
I just come in with a very sort of practical example of where we've worked very closely with MOPAC and specifically around commissioning? So when I think about delivery of Obsteteria, which is our response to rape and serious sexual offence investigation, we know a massively important part of that is the experience of the victim, and we see victim attrition rates that were far too high.
Yeah.
So we know we need really strong ISVA provision within that space. We know NGOs are operating in a really unsafe landscape, or have been previously, and we discussed that with MOPAC, and they've come forward with a much more long-term approach for identifying the best provision across London, which allows those NGOs that are operating that space to identify the best talent, so that we have people that actually want to work and support victims. And we've seen attrition rates reduce actually by victims in that space. And on top of that, it's we're working with MOPAC around legal advocacy. So these are victims of RASO offences that have got additional legal advocacy outside of all the support they would get from their police officer. There is the provision in order that they can tackle some of the other sociological factors outside of that criminal investigation. Well, so that really strong partnership.
No, I'm really pleased about that, because that's been a problem for so many years. So if you're working together on that, that's music to my ears. I'm going to move on now. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. The VORG strategy states that a long-term prevention plan will be published. Has that been finalised at all, or is there a publication date? Jane, is that for you?
Hi, so we've been working in partnership with the VRU on this, and also working with a range of other partners. We established a set of principles which we're using as a basis to develop the long-term prevention plan. We're tying that alongside the development of the VORG strategy, so all of that will be phased. The VORG strategy hopefully will be coming out in June, and then the prevention plan thereafter. But it is definitely a key plank of the work that we're doing. There's no sense in us putting all our efforts into supporting victims and survivors. That, for me, is sticking plaster. What we really need to do is to stop either VORG happening in the first place, or at least to stop people being re-victimised. So that's the basis of the plan that we hope to develop.
Thanks. So we'll come up. Sorry, I will come to you. So are you talking July, perhaps? Then, when you say it will follow after, do you mean immediately after, or?
Soon after. I'm not going to give a date just yet. I need to sort of discuss that internally. Okay. But the workings are there, and we're working closely with the VRU on this.
I mean, I don't want a blood oath, but just does that kind of mean this year that would be coming out, or?
Yeah, I would say this year.
Yeah. Okay. And also, you said that there were some agreed principles already. Are those principles that you can share with the committee?
They're published.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're on our website.
Can you just talk the principles? I haven't seen the principles.
I can send you the information. I'm really happy to do that. I can do it.
Yeah, well, your research could just Google Mayor's VORG strategy. It's just the bottom of the page. Sorry. They're on the bottom of the page
of the principles at all quickly.
The VORG prevention principles. If you Google Mayor's VORG strategy, it takes you to a page that has the strategy, and at the bottom of that is also the principles and some other useful information.
Yeah. Do you want to just talk about the principles?
Sure. So the idea is, I think that we recognise that a long-term prevention plan for London is the right thing to do. But that's quite a complex endeavour. So to help shape our work, particularly given its partnership work, most of VORG prevention, and we know it needs to be right across City Hall. Oh, sorry, Jane. Right across City Hall, but also right across London. We need some principles for people to sign up to. So we worked with an incredibly large amount of stakeholders to produce these principles, which are like a sort of guiding and coherent set of things that we can do all together. What they don't describe is the activity, because for VORG prevention to be really successful, we need it to live in everyone else's strategy. So a really good example of this, last year, the VRU and ourselves and our public health colleagues from the GLA. Sorry, is this what you wanted?
No, I just wanted you to tell me the principles, that the prevention plan is based on.
Oh, what? You just want me to read out the VOG prevention principles?
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to open up now.
Oh, sure. All right, 1 second.
Do you not know the 4 principles? There's 4 of them. Are they the same as last time?
No, those aren't the prevention principles. So there are 4 chapter headings in the VOG strategy, which are prevention, victims, perpetrators, trust and confidence. But those aren't the prevention principles. So they're the because that includes reduction, includes.
Yeah. So what are the prevention principles?
So we have 7 principles, which I'm trying to load up at my. But I can talk about that in a second. I'm very happy to do that. In fact, I can talk about it now.
Sorry, I just you were kind of like, why don't you Google it to me? And I'm just asking you, and you didn't either. Anyway, I just wanted to know the principles. I didn't, but you're both Googling it. I can use Google later. I just thought that you would have a better knowledge to kind of spin it off, because if you told me the prevention principles that the prevention plan was around, then I could ask you more questions. It wasn't meant to be a whole thing. Liv, did you want to add something?
Well, I think so, really, because this is our kind of bread and butter as the violence reduction unit. So, I think what's been really good to see is the development of a VOG strategy that's based on the principle that the Mayor brought in for the violence reduction unit, which is really around a public health approach. And I know that's a bit of jargon, and sometimes people relate to that bit of jargon and sometimes they don't, but essentially it's saying you have really got to look at the long-term drivers of violence, and you've got to look at the culture, society's culture, and you've really got to make sure that you're not just putting the emphasis on enforcement and arrest, because we're not going to arrest ourselves out of that. And that's clearly the approach that we've taken in the violence reduction unit in working with young people. And I suppose what we can bring particularly to the prevention plan, which we have been working with MOPAC around, is our expertise at connecting with young people. We've talked before about a young people's action group. You've had the benefit of them here, but actually it's wider than just that group. It's the way we connect with young people. And it's also how then that translates into key areas such as education, where we're doing a phenomenal amount of work as a violence reduction unit. I can talk to that, but I don't want to interrupt the flow of the agenda, but tackling misogyny, and that's an important part, or thinking of how we're working with parents and thinking about the impact of, 1 in 5 young people having grown up in a household that sadly has experienced domestic abuse, and what that really means for then developing a prevention plan, or indeed how you skill up youth workers, or you skill up teachers or health professionals to be able to spot those signs of DA, so that you're really beginning to understand the drivers and putting in place the education that's needed, but putting in place the training for professionals, and beginning to put together a really coherent prevention plan that means that we're not just focusing on what are the police doing and what are the stats telling us, which absolutely is incredibly important, but that we're recognising if you've got an epidemic, you need to be doing a lot more than just putting all your energy there and thinking about, the experience of young people from when they're born and raised. So I can talk to more detail about some of those individual programmes, but that gives you the ethos, and that gives you, I suppose, the importance of it for us.
I suppose, and it's an important point we've already touched on today, right, around the prevention, and I'm sure that's going to focus, what the Mayor's already said, that will focus particularly on boys and men. And we talked about it already, the draw to this kind of more misogynistic culture. But obviously that there is a feeling, especially among young boys, of kind of being vilified for things that they don't understand, and not having those positive kind of characteristics of men accepted, or having this as a groupthink, because women, we can be just as guilty as perpetuating misogynistic culture too. So how will the prevention plan address kind of making this more positive? Because obviously I think that is one thing in the drive against VOG. We all have to accept that it has alienated a certain cohort of young men.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually. And so there is too much of a tendency, isn't it, to just see that through the lens of young women and girls, because of the title of it. So just to give you a couple of practical examples, we are, through the work we're doing with Tender and Nurture in schools, we do a lot of healthy relationship training, and thinking about what constitutes a good relationship. We know that over 20,000 young people across London have been reached by that. We know that once they've gone through that training, 90% of them can recognise a healthy relationship and 80% can recognise what a red flag is. That isn't done in a kind of universal way. It's done in a targeted way, but it also includes sessions for just young men and boys. So that is an important recognition of how you might have different conversations with different groups. The second thing I would say is that, you know, mentoring has been a big ambition of the Mayor, and I was privileged to lead that piece of work, which reached, you know, 100,000 young people across London. And what we recognise there is the power of that trusted individual and the importance of that male role model to change perceptions and turn what can feel, as you're expressing it, Emma, into something that makes a young boy maybe feel alienated and not sure where they fit and who they're meant to be following. By having that relationship, having that emphasis on mentoring, I think that really helps. And then finally, another programme that we I may have talked about previously, I'm not sure, but work with fathers. A lot of fathers have gone through trauma in their upbringing. Many of those have been on the receiving end of domestic abuse in the household, and it's breaking that intergenerational pattern and making sure there's positive role models. And the two programmes that we're investing in, both in the north and south of London, which are consortia of organisations, are really providing that safe space for fathers to be able to explore their feelings, giving them therapeutic support, and also giving them access to the services that, again, they often feel inhibited from going to because they don't feel maybe that's kind of what they should be doing as a man. And all of that speaks to how important I think prevention and culture is in terms of challenging this issue. But fundamental has got to be not just working with young women and girls, it's also got to be how do you address you know, the conflicting emotions and the incredibly conflicting signals we give as a society to our young boys. I haven't mentioned online work, and I do at some point want to come back to that, but that just gives you hopefully a bit of a sense of how we're tackling the work with young boys.
Okay, thanks. So I've got one more question, and hopefully it'll be a nice segue, but Jane and Will wanted to come back to you. I'm really concerned about the decommissioning of Cyber Helpline, which I think has been a fantastic service. So Cyber Helpline, obviously, you'll know, but maybe other committee members and members of the panel are less familiar, has been helping with a volunteer network of cyber experts as well as an investigative staff team to look into cases of cyber stalking, online harm, especially against young women and girls in London. You've got Met officers contacting the service every day, and this is for quite a good price, I would suggest, of £170,000 per year. We're now up to them having to decommission in a couple of weeks. It would be £85,000 to get them to the end of the year. I know, Will, you appreciate their work and have commended their work. So how can we reverse this? It's not too late. Let's make sure that they can continue that work.
Yeah, it's tricky at the moment with the state of finances, I think. So we were really fortunate to have a bit of additional funding for the Ministry of Justice, which we were able to use to support a London-specific, so we were buying additionality from the Cyber Helpline for Londoners. Unfortunately, as you know, the Ministry of Justice had to kind of look at how they're allocating their funding. We have slightly less overall for, thankfully not for specific VORG funding, but for victims we do have slightly less. And the specific additional money we were getting for the Cyber Helpline unfortunately isn't available. The other backdrop is obviously, as the Chair mentioned, you know, the Met's finances at the moment. The Met's and MOPAC's money is somewhat indistinguishable. So we're also looking to, you know, we're also unfortunately looking potentially at some further efficiencies at the moment. That's in the MOPAC budget documentation that was reduced recently. So the sort of challenge is, the challenges are sort of financial backdrop at the moment. This doesn't mean the Cyber Helpline stops, though, and it doesn't mean it's not available, which I think we're really grateful for.
It does weaken that relationship with the Met, and actually this is all really interlinked, because if we're losing officers in the Met, we're losing capability in the Met. Actually, this is a service which is providing the work of police officers with an investigative team, cyber experts that are actually looking, and in many cases have seen cases reopened for victims where they've been closed. The work of the Cyber Helpline has seen those cases reopened. and they're providing that additional expertise, which really is vital. So I think in the context of the funding, £85,000 either through the Mayor's Fund, through MOPAC, from the VRU, is something that we should be looking to make sure we can keep that service going. And if that's not something you can do, can I just ask what representations you've made to the Ministry of Justice?
So we're in a as you can imagine, a big conversation with the Ministry of Justice at the moment as the comprehensive spending review takes place and as government looks at how it's going to allocate all its money. So we've been providing a lot of evidence about what things look like in London, what we think works. But it is obviously up to officials and ministers and ultimately the Chancellor and Treasury to decide ultimately what the MOJ has available to it. We are trying to influence that as best we can, and we're providing all the evidence we can from London. I mean, I think London did have additionality for the cyber helpline, unlike anywhere else in the country, and that provides that additional evidence base that I think you were talking about. And the Ministry of Justice has that. But that's not all we're doing on cybercrime. And whilst, it's regretful that we can't continue with that provision at the moment due to financial constraints, doesn't mean we're giving up on cybercrime or we're giving up on what's happening. And there's a lot going on in that space, probably for a different committee, but session. But I mean, if we want to start getting into online harm now, and we want to start talking about tech-enabled VOG.
No, it's just we're talking specifically about this service. I mean, it's a shame that this government hasn't provided the additional money that obviously we had previously in order to run the service. I still think that there is a way in which we can save that service and keep it for Londoners. Jane, you were literally saying earlier, we don't have the level of service, victims don't have the level of service provision that they should have. You are not going to get a service with this kind of bang for your buck of just extending this service. I think it really does need to be revisited, and that would be my call to all of you today, is to revisit your budgets, because for £85,000 to keep this going for another 6 months, in the interim of a time where, Jane, you've recognised victims don't have that level of service, you're not going to be able to find another cost-effective way to do that.
No, I totally understand what you're saying, Emma, and it is a constant source of worry for me personally. And I just want to really assure people that we are making strong representations to the MOJ. We have really regular meetings with them. We provide data. We've got lots of evidence about the effectiveness of our services and what's needed for London. But I understand exactly what you're saying. Thank you.
Okay. I was a bit disappointed we couldn't have the answer to the principles. Can you send the link?
We
no,
can.
not now, because we're running
Chair,
late now.
Yeah, I just want to say that the reason I couldn't do them off the top of my head is there are 21 of them. And they're split into sort of 3 sections, so I don't really think I don't know what they are.
No, hang on. Your answer to Assemblymember Best was that there were 7. We've got to move on, because can you send the link then?
Absolutely, I can do that right now.
It's really important, and that's a little bit disappointing, but we'll move on. Assemblymember Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the Mayor's refreshed VOG strategy, and forgive me, indulge me, Chair, I'm just putting my hat on as the Economy, Culture and Skills Committee, London Assembly Economy, Culture and Skills Committee Chair. You may be aware that in the last fortnight we published our nighttime economy report, and a key recommendation was that the Ask for Angela scheme, which is, I think, very popular with Londoners and law enforcement, I can see them nodding, there have been problems with this. A recent BBC investigation revealed that a lot of staff in venues haven't been trained in it. And one of the key recommendations of our report was that the Ask for Angela scheme should be tied to licensing, so it becomes a condition of licensing. I wonder, MOPAC, what your view on that is, and then also I'd like the Met's view as well, please.
So you're right to say that the Ask for Angela scheme is the highlights that came out of the BBC investigation. I think for us, we're working with the GLA 24-hour team, and I think we're quite united, I'd say, in the perception that there are other different schemes out there, and I think it causes confusion to people on the ground who actually just want help. So I think I would really want to see nationally that government is wedded to a particular scheme to avoid this confusion, and we will be lobbying government in that regard. Ask for Angela, we would back that if that was the national scheme. And yeah, we would continue to work with government and others to ensure that it's part of the tapestry of what's on offer in a local area for people who need help.
But would you support actual, you know, it being tied to licensing? And that's whatever scheme it is, and I hear what you're saying, but it has that what it does is it has that enforcement power.
Yes, yes, definitely we would be supportive of that. My answer was slightly not so direct, because I was trying not to wed myself to ask for Angela, but yes, to a scheme, that would make complete sense.
Thank you very much. Met.
Yeah, if I can come in very quickly on that, we've seen the real success of Ask for Angela, haven't we, across different boroughs in London, particularly Westminster, that do have a closer link with licensing, don't they? With, you know, the focus on the nighttime economy, what that then encourages within the licensed venues around the wave training, you know, their ability within those premises to identify vulnerability, also identify perpetrators as well before they can strike, as it were. And that we link very, very closely with licensing venues on that. So very, very positive experience of Ask for Angela. We do recognise the challenge it is in keeping that really refreshed in the minds of staff that are working in licensed venues. A lot of transients in terms of staffing. So therefore, the more we can encourage its use, the more effective we know that can be.
Thank you. And I mean, your views on it being tied to licensing?
Yeah, I guess it all depends on the circumstances, doesn't it, as well? But it is certainly something that could be considered, isn't it? And we focus on, we've got 3 pillars to our VORG strategy in the Met. One of them is safer spaces, which links pretty neatly into the nighttime economy and the work we do there. So, but to give you reassurance, we would look at it holistically, and if a venue is unsafe, we would take action. You know, if we see sexual offences occurring that are, you know, we will take action. So, you know, whether you need to explicitly link it or not, it's certainly a tactic you could consider. But we're very supportive of the scheme and seen it being very effective. But each to their own, and we look. I mean, generally, in the terms of the nighttime economy, we do a lot of work around sort of looking at the risk terrain modelling, as we call it. So what are the factors that are risk factors in that locality that we can take action against? And we deploy behavioural detection officers to spot perpetrators, to spot risky behaviours, to intervene quickly, to prevent crimes happening all the time. So just to broaden out how important the nighttime economy is, tackling the VORG in the nighttime economy is. But it is certainly a tactic that could be considered.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbutt.
I wanted to ask some questions on the MOPAC's VORG Grassroots Fund 2023 to 2025. I just wondered, if we could hear some reflections on the delivery and the impact and what the plans are for the future of the fund. I know we've mentioned kind of some of the services under this and the issues of demand and capacity, but it'd be really great to hear some reflections and some plans.
Sorry, I'll pick that up eventually. My reflections on the Grassroots Fund are that it was, and it continues to be, a piece of innovation, and it really, really has changed the provision across London and who gets access to services. I think the most unique thing about the Grassroots Fund for me is that we tied to it a capacity building element, which is very unusual. And so through that fund, we're able to ensure that smaller organisations that sometimes don't have the reach and access into funds that the bigger organisations do, we're able to get funding for them to support sometimes very, very vulnerable members of our London community. I am so happy when I hear the the testimonies from the victims and survivors who use those services. I'm very happy when I hear the testimonies of the organisations who have received the funding. And one of the key things for me is that on the back of being recipients of the Grassroots Fund, they've been able to reach out and leverage in other funding. So, and that's allowed them to strengthen themselves in the as organisations, but also strengthen the sector as well. So, yeah, those are very brief reflections on what I think about the Grassroots Fund.
And have you got any things, I mean, those sound great, and I know some of the organisations that have been funded are doing some really amazing work. So I guess it's just, yeah, anything more specifically on kind of impact or what you've learnt around the demand and capacity. I think you've alluded to the fact that some of the organisations are incredibly in high demand and at capacity, but yeah, any reflections on that?
Impact data, there is an impact report actually that I can send to you so that you can have the detail. I don't have figures off the top of my head, but definitely I can say from memory that the impact has been very good in terms of the fund, and it's reached just a range of individuals that probably wouldn't have got services. What I can also say is that those services are overwhelmed. It seems that any time, it's almost like you lift a rock up and then loads of stuff comes out. That's unfortunately where we are with VORG. You set something up and then that quickly gets overwhelmed. But it is I'm very proud of that particular funding and what it's done to the agencies and to the recipients.
And then yeah, it sounds really good. What are the what's the future of the fund? Because obviously does it end this month? Or yeah, what's the plan for, what's the next steps with it?
So we're currently, as you know, we're developing, well, I don't know if you do know, but we are developing a new VORG strategy, and we've been consulting quite widely on that. And we're making decisions based on the back of that as to where we should be targeting our money. So I'm hopeful, but I think there's a big conversation that needs to happen on the back of the information that we get through back from stakeholders. Do you want?
Great. So does that? I think this is what was alluded to in the last committee meeting, that there's a potential gap of about 6 months, and obviously, I know you've just said about the amazing work around capacity building, but there's a potential of losing that if staff have to be made redundant and things.
Yeah. So the Grassroots Fund is not. It's a bit different to perhaps other funding. It's not to be seen as a continuous fund. It's there to sort of kickstart and stabilise organisations. So, and actually a gap unusually is quite helpful in this regard, because what we don't want to do is to create a dependency on this particular fund. This fund is there to help over a period of time to capacity build, to get organisations strong enough to reach out and leverage in other funding. And then we'll have a rethink, we'll look at the impact, we'll go back out if we can, if there is money, and maybe a new set of organisations will take the place. So I think it's slightly unusual in that regard.
No, that sounds good. Do you know how much money they've been able to bring in? It's 36 organisations, isn't it, that have been funded?
In this current round, there's 36. I think there was 41 beforehand, yeah.
Do you have a rough figure on how much they've been able to bring in? That would be really interesting.
I can find out.
Yeah,
I can definitely
really
speak to our colleagues and find out.
Because I know that's how kind of funding works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that I don't think it's one of our specific questions, but also there was a comment last time about the Say Mate to Mate campaign, which I know you ran, and needing a formal evaluation of that. And I just wondered if that's in the pipeline. I know I've seen some initial kind of outcomes, but I didn't know if there was a formal evaluation.
Yeah, I'm going to say I need to get back to you on that. I didn't actually run it. I was part of a group that contributed, so I sort of brought the policy angle, but it was ran by our colleagues in GLA Marketing and Communications. But I'm really happy to get an update to you on that.
That'd be great. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, but you're right to us about that. I mean, much hilarity was had about the mate strategy at the time. Assembly Member Roberts.
If it actually works, if any guy had a word with a mate and said, "Come on," surely it was
well, we'll
worth doing.
find out, won't we? Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you. This is regarding the Survivors Gateway, and we've heard concerns raised at this committee about the Survivors Gateway having to pause online referrals because of high demand. And the question is, what is MOPAC and the Mayor doing to address this?
So we are currently out to commission on a brand new Pan-London sexual violence service. There's lots of lessons we've learned on the Gateway, from the Gateway. The Gateway's still running, by the way, which have influenced this new version that we're hoping to get up and running from May. So that has gone out to tender. There are people who have put in for that to be able to run that service, and we are currently working through the tendering process around that. I don't know legally, I can't say anything else, but yeah, that's where we are with the Gateway.
Okay, and what will you said there have been lessons learned. What can you give us some examples of how this new process will be different and hopefully better than the previous?
Yeah, sure. One of the key things for us was the being able to be much more efficient about monitoring demand and capacity, and being able to predict surge a bit more and being able to move staff around. It's very sexual violence to deal with sexual violence on a daily basis is actually it's quite draining for the staff in the service. So we had to be quite careful about thinking about new roles or how to break the patterns in roles so that they don't have that heaviness on them. So the demand and capacity model that we have built is actually quite a new thing. We are really trying to think more about the technological side of things, so technological help. We're never, ever, ever in the near future going to meet demand because people just keep coming. We don't advertise our services because if we did, everybody would fall over. So for those that come that can't get access immediately to an IDFA or to any therapeutic care or holistic care, we've made sure that part of this new service that's coming online will have a lot more around self-help or other forms of technologies, group work as well. So it is a beefed up service, but I do want to manage expectation and to say again, it will never ever be able to help everyone. It will just do its absolute best to do what it can in the funding envelope.
Thank you. Just one final short one, if I may. It's just we heard from the End Violence Against Women campaign, and that too many cases which come through them they involve police intervention, when they would prefer to see referrals direct through to specialist services, which would obviously be of better support to the victim in many cases, and also free up valuable police time where police can play a vital role, but sometimes are not necessarily needed. Will that form part of the new strategy, possibly direct referral through rather than police involvement?
They've always been able to direct refer. We can make that very, very clear in this new service if that's an issue that you've been picking up.
Well, it's one which has been raised by a key player within the sector.
I think that's, if you don't mind me saying, it's one of the real strengths of both the old model and the new one is because we have community-based buy-and-for organisations as part of an ecosystem of support. For lots of people with, particular intersections, going to someone, in their community that's specialist to them is a much better way into the system than going through the police. So I think that's why we've absolutely sought to preserve, but also build on, that buy-and-for specialist support alongside, for others who would want a different type of provision, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. So hopefully, more people will come through that route too.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Liv, this question is to you. Strategic needs assessments carried out by the boroughs as well as the VRU only take into account domestic abuse and sexual violence alongside non-VOG related crimes. How does the VRU ensure that the assessments capture the wider spectrum of VOG in London, including VOG affecting young people?
Thank you. So I think the work that you're referring to is what we were required to do through the serious violence duty, and it was our way of looking at the assessment of violence across London and then also working individually and collectively with all of the boroughs. The legislation was quite clear that it was, and it was agreed then across London, that the focus should be on sexual violence and domestic abuse, and therefore this new refreshed plan does have that information. Is that sufficient to be able to give us enough of a picture around violence against women and girls? No, I don't think it is. And one of the things that we've called for repeatedly, and I know partners have, is that we actually need a strategic needs assessment that is looking at all of the factors around violence against women and girls. And I do think that there is an issue for us coming up, or there's a potential for us now with the new government's drive towards prevention partnerships and the information that's going to be needed to support that work, that may well happen. But I think the premise of your question, Keith, is that we've got a good system in place with the boroughs. We have got an overall view of violence in London, but we are, as we were required to do by the serious violence duty, but what we could definitely do with is a specific special needs assessment, and I think our colleagues in MOPAC would agree and would be hoping to do something along those lines.
And that would be particularly around the needs of young people, yes?
I think it needs to be around the needs of young people. No, it's just a much better analysis of the different forms and impacts and gaps of in the impact, I suppose, of violence against women and girls. That's what we're talking about. No, it's not specific to young people.
But it would include young people.
Yes, I mean it would include. I mean, we've got a very good, through the work that we've got and the work that we've been leading across London on the SNAs as they exist at the moment. We've got a good picture of violence against young people. We've got a good picture on sexual abuse and on domestic abuse and sexual violence. We've got a good relationship with boroughs. We can work across London and work individually with them, and we can assess through that means the profile of violence and what the responses are. What we haven't got, and we should have, in my opinion, is an SNA that is broader. Look at violence affecting women and girls.
Oh, that's very good, thank you. I was going to ask you a whole series of questions about the Mayor's manifesto, but what I will do, if that's okay with you, Lib, is send you an email with those requests, and then perhaps you could send a written answer to the committee. It's just a bit pushed on time at the moment.
That sounds as if you're slightly letting me off the hook, Keith, so I'm happy by that. Yes, thank you.
I might want to talk to you about something in Romford later. So
yeah, no, that would be testing my knowledge on specifics on particular areas. But
we just want to know what progress is made, really.
Progress in terms of
on certain commitments in the Mayor's manifesto.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, very happy to answer that. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no
okay,
problem.
can I just ask one of them that I particularly is on page 37 of the manifesto, you made a commitment to fund new long-term homes for survivors of domestic abuse, to give those fleeing violence a place to stay. Has there been any progress on that?
Yes, I would say so. We are working with GLA Housing and Land on the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation Programme. They have a programme called the DAS app, which is...
Okay, because of time.
Okay.
If you can, we'll write from the committee because.
That's fine.
But on that particular, how many additional homes have been provided?
I can't answer that on the top of my head. So I think that's
approximately.
I don't know.
Okay.
I can't answer that. Sorry.
Okay, I've got a feeling that perhaps it needs to be in writing, all these different ones anyway. All right, I was particularly interested in that one.
Oh, I do apologise.
Right, OK, we're now moving on to the Met's actions on VOG, and we're going back to Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. So, this is to the Met. Good morning. Just about. What progress has the Met made in its work to eradicate harmful misogynistic attitudes amongst its officers as part of restoring trust among young women and girls?
Yeah, so I would say we've got a lot of work streams in place on this. One of the ones that's obviously come up in the fore in the media recently is our work around opposure, essentially. So this was obviously identifying. So if I just rewind a little bit, we did a review of domestic abuse, sexually perpetrated matters back 10 years. I think it was from 2012 to 2022. Just reviewed what our response was, and from that identified numbers of individuals that we wanted to review and take and consider again. One of those considerations was obviously whether they should hold vetting, and we put a process in place to essentially review and remove people who are not suitable to hold vetting. We had a judicial review, as people will have seen, which basically ruled against our process. We're appealing that, but also quite keen on working with government. I know government are looking at this to try and come up with some regulations around this, so we can actually legitimately and easily remove people who should not be in policing, who don't have the right vetting. So that's one thing. The other thing, one other key thing, of course, is we've been accelerating our misconduct cases. So making sure that we've got the chairs in place to conduct those hearings. People are aware, I'm sure, in the committee of the rules change, and senior police officers now hear those as well. So we're accelerating those, but also opening up lines of reporting. So, for example, we've got our own sort of Crime Stoppers line, which has gone national now, for people to be able to report police officers and things they are concerned about. So we've been driving that one forward alongside internal sort of listening and training people through New Met for London about the behaviours expected, about how to challenge, about how to report, how to support people who report. We've got an internal group of an exceptional group who support people who report internally. Very much like any other victim of crime, or they need the support, and there is a group within the Met that do that. There are many other initiatives. Angela, I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Yeah, I can come in on a couple of additional things to talk about there. So we're pushing up standard training through the organisation, but particularly with new recruits. Really, really important that we talk and we set the culture and the tone of the organisation from that very, very earliest opportunity. We've improved the criminal investigation into any officers accused of domestic abuse or sexual offences. So we saw a little bit of drift that is not acceptable. We need to reassure the public that we're prioritising those cases. So we've put in additional scrutiny and governance at a local level. So those local SLT members that will work very closely with our professional standards colleagues as well at the same time. We've also, within the organisation, we've got a he for she network, which is where male officers will act in support of female counterparts as well. It's all about supporting that kind of culture change across the organisation. So there's just a couple of additional things just to mention.
Thank you. Okay. Casey's review was, as we know, a couple of years ago now, and in that review she did recommend that the Met and the Mayor of London should commission independent progress reviews after 2 years. 2 years is up. Do you know if there is an independent progress review taking place, or?
I think that's subject to discussions with MOPAC at the moment, so I absolutely recognise what you say. I don't know if I think it's subject to discussions, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, that's right. Subject to discussions at the moment as to exactly what form that takes.
So we can see in the not too distant future an independent review popping up, can we?
That's the commitment that was made.
Good. Make a note of that. Len, do you want to come in now rather than on that? All right, I've just got one more question, if that's okay with you, Len. Yeah, thanks. Okay. The Met accepted the case review and subsequently published its reform plan, A New Met for London. In the Mayor's most recent budget, there was £32 million less than anticipated for A New Mayor for London when the budget was set in 24-25. How will this impact on work to tackle not just fog, but the actual reform of the police?
Yeah, so it's going to put us. It makes it difficult for us when you lose that amount of money and you don't have that amount of money to go forward. So it's going to be pretty challenging, of course. But where we are clear, because this is a priority for the Met in New Met for London, VORG, so internally, externally, it's a priority. The areas that we're looking to make sure that we have a degree of protection around are, for example, our domestic abuse and sexual offences investigation team in the Department of Professional Standards. So where we've made those investments, we're keen to keep those, to keep the focus on this. Additionally, sort of tackling violence against women and girls in our public protection teams, we're trying to protect those. We're trying to protect certainly the neighbourhood teams as well there, because they're an important link that we haven't discussed here, but in protecting communities. So there are key areas we have actually invested in that also helped us get the Met out of Engage as well with HMI that we're keen to protect. But there are other areas, as people know on the panel, that we're going through a degree of, you know, there's going to be some tough choices, and we're still working through all the implications of the decisions we've got to make off the back of the budget, but it is going to be difficult. I'd just like to give assurance that where we're VORG, internally, externally, we're still focused. It's a priority for us. So we're going to try and keep our investments in those areas.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. I've got a few quick questions for the Met. The first one is, and this is maybe my lack of understanding about V100, but in some data we had from December, I wasn't quick enough to note your data down, but there was 93 subjects that have been convicted since V100 nominal, but 39 were convicted of VORG offences. Now, wouldn't we expect all of them to be convicted of VORG offences? I'm trying to understand those numbers.
Not necessarily. For example, you might highlight somebody who's been previously arrested for rape or sexual offences, but actually the method of disrupting would be, for example, for robbery or for harassment, or so you wouldn't necessarily see them always convicted for VORG offences. It might be there's another offence or another way of disrupting or another order that still protects society and takes them out of circulation. Does that make sense?
I guess so, but I think it's my understanding of who ends up on the list then. So who, yeah.
Yeah, we're looking at VORG, essentially the VORG risk factors and abuse of children, you know, abuse of women and girls. Those are some key areas how you end up being into the VORG, you know, your past history. But it might be
past history that they've already been convicted for.
No, not necessarily. It could be intelligence as well. So, because not everyone is, you know, sometimes there's the intelligence or there's risk factors that we look at that will put them into that position. But it might be we don't disrupt or arrest or, you know, prevent them causing through a VORG offence necessarily. It might be another way. It might be another order. It might be to do with antisocial behaviour. It can be whatever we can use to disrupt them, if that makes sense. And
then that would stop them in the intelligence you've got around child abuse. Is that what you're saying? So I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I'll bring Andrew in if I'm missing the question.
I can see what the gentleman... Yeah, I do. Yeah, completely.
Do you want me to just come in on some of that, just additional sort of, so to get on the list, the VORG 100 list, you'll be named as as a suspect in a crime report, essentially, and then obviously we stack those offences. We look at the most serious based on the Cambridge Harm Index, which is based on sentencing guidelines. We take the most dangerous 100 and we task against them, and the intention of that process is to make women and girls safer. So we use whatever method we possibly can, and that's where the Commissioner comes in and says, you know, we want to not just focus on the reactive investigation, although the reactive investigation is really, really important and strengthening the victim to support. But where we can't, and some of these perpetrators have got away with these offences for a very long time because they're feared in society, we then as police officers will look at other ways to safeguard the public and take them off the streets. And we've seen cases where, when we've been able to do that, the victim of the initial allegation would feel more empowered to come forward and support the activity.
Thank you. That's very enlightening with the data. The other one I wanted to ask about was something you mentioned earlier about the training around being able to, the SOP around being able to investigate all sexual offences. I just wondered when that came in and when you're expecting to see a kind of impact, or how you're monitoring the impact of that.
Yep, so the other sexual offences, so contact and non-contact sexual offences that don't fall within the RASO category, we were all forces were asked to produce a SOP, which we have done, and we're moving forward with that new way of working. What that includes is this focus, the focus on supporting victims to come forward, because what we find is, especially with non-contact sexual offences, victims don't always report as much as they should, and what we would like to do is urge them to see themselves as part of that wider investigation, because we know offenders are committing multiple offences. We're getting better at investigating linked series as well, which is really, really important. So, yeah, we are moving forward with activity in that space.
And the other part I wanted to... That's great to hear. The other part I wanted to hear about was women officers who've reported abuse from a male officer or a partner. I had a quote from someone that said that she was told, so as a police officer, she was told that being abused meant that she could no longer be a police officer. And I just think it's how you're creating that safe environment that women officers are being able to confidently report, be heard and be treated fairly through the processes.
Yeah, clearly that's absolutely not the case. If you do report, you can obviously still be a police officer. And we have taken strides, but we've got lots to do still, I think, to make sure we get the confidence of all our officers to report. I'm sure there are many others who won't, or find other routes to deal with the issue, but we want people to come forward and have those confidence, and it is about giving those channels that, not necessarily through your line management, through the Department of Professional Standards, or through kind of Network for Women, or through anonymous reporting through our reporting line. There are different routes, and trying to build the confidence of people, but also, you know, when people report it, one of the things you'll see in the case is, does something happen? Does something change because of it? And that's really would give the confidence as well, to demonstrate to people that something does happen, that we take it seriously, that there is an outcome, and that person is dealt with. That's the other part.
Yeah, and it was really good to hear you've got like an IDVA within your service and stuff like that. I think that's really, really important. And just finally, in our last meeting, we heard that the police were not, some of the police officers working with some of the organisations weren't up to speed with some things like cyber flashing or upskirting, and just making sure that you're hearing that feedback and making sure that everyone's up to date.
Yeah, that's part of the comms, that's the internal comms around the other sexual offence SOP that you talked about, and there is some online training that we're rolling out to all frontline officers in support of that as well.
And do you know the timescale for that? When will people be?
So as part of the new Met for London training that we're rolling out, that's kind of throughout the summer, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, we heard about
all the
that.
way through the summer. I think it finishes around October time.
Great.
There or thereabouts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Duval.
Thank you very much. Just following on from that, you know, trying to get increased reporting, but crucial in VOG issues, particularly with young people, must be third-party reporting. I don't want to touch on the schools because there's a section later on questions, and you were asking about neighbourhood policing. There's a question coming your way on neighbourhood policing. But third-party reporting then clearly needs a bit of a overhaul. You've gone through the overhaul and you've quite clearly told us what you've done there. Where does that fit into third-party reporting, taking that bit within the Met? Because young people are not necessarily going to come forward, but actually someone concerned, friend, parents, other relatives will come forward. So how seriously are you taking that, and what's the new regime for dealing with that?
Yeah, I'll bring Andrew in a moment, but just around third-party reporting, well, we take it like any other crime report, essentially. So it will come to us, we'll investigate it, and we'll make decisions in relation to it. Third-party reporting is important to get that holistic kind of picture, but also join the dots up sometimes about a person in particular that you might not, so if they don't report, we might not know they're a serial offender or that there is a serious risk around this individual, because despite the third-party report, we might still take action. You have to balance up the victim and the public good here, really. It's a really can be quite a difficult equation, but where we're clear, where you get those third-party reports where we identify somebody as dangerous, we need to take action to protect society more generally and prevent more women becoming victims of said individual. But it comes in, and it'll be treated in the same way. We would deal with it seriously, we'd review it properly, we'd risk assess it thoroughly, and we'd take action that was appropriate, if that's what you mean.
I do, but historically we've not been good at that, have we? I mean, I'd say this as a bit of tough love in terms of the Met. Not just recently, historically. I mean, historically, even coming on, there are recent issues of where we've not got to grips with that third-party reporting, partly because we're dealing with high-volume crime sometimes, we're dealing with other issues. It's easy to put to one side. So are you telling me there's a renewed vigour inside the Met that says, no, we're not putting that to one side, we're either storing that data for future use in case it occurs, and we're not just going to put it there and within a couple of days, no further action? There's got to be an outcome of some description.
Yeah, they're all different cases, aren't they? And you've got to look at the risk and the threat. But absolutely, seriously, it goes back to Soteria, doesn't it? Yeah. I think fundamentally, which changes the culture and approach to sexual offences, and that is all about victim-centric, offender-focused. We're really context-driven. That's where we're going, really. And I think the education around that, the focus that Soteria has brought around sexual offences, has changed, I think, our approach quite dramatically.
I mean, and also just going back on domestic violence, say, I mean, this is important between two adults, but as to young people. So, am I right in saying, if there is a case reported to the police, right, and someone turns up in one form or another, there is an outcome? And by an outcome, I don't mean no further action. There is an outcome. So if I'm a young person, and it's somehow either I've reported it to you, that somebody, after that encounter with you, is going to go away. That outcome can be all different sort of things. It could be a provision of information, it could be an arrest, it could be much more in terms of that, but there will be an outcome. Are we clear about that? And are your officers clear about that? Because it goes to the wider issues of dealing with these issues, both bringing people to justice where they've broken the laws, but also in terms of sending clear messages that we're not going to tolerate this anymore in some form, but also following up, because it might not be clear on that first encounter that there is likely to be a more serious incident later on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can just come in on that part. Certainly, when we talk about domestic abuse cases that are reported, all of those cases will be allocated for secondary investigation. Okay, so all of those cases will be triaged by a supervisor. All of those cases will be sent through for secondary investigation. And back to what Mr. Boone mentioned around that Soteria focus, so the offender focus. I think as police, we've previously been far too focused on the criminal justice outcome, and we can anticipate that quite early sometimes to our own detriment and to the detriment of victims because we're not identifying risk appropriately. So we are getting better, and the V100 is an example of that. And as you say, third-party reporting at trying to put the focus on understanding the risk and dealing with the perpetrator in a more focused way. But when we're talking about the impact of domestic abuse on young people, and particularly people in the schooling environment, we have got really good relationships, up in Compass, relationships with schools where we can share information and we can make sure that those interventions take place with that child and their voice is heard, and further risk is understood from that point of view moving forward.
Okay, and then just lastly, the new Met for London plan originally stated there would be a rollout of a new victim care hub in early 2024. What impact will that have, and will that also cater for young people that are in the VOG process?
Yeah, the victim hub is out there. I think it goes across all victims, but you've got to be particularly careful around VOG and the intervention. So realistically, a lot of the VOG, we are more reliant on the public protection teams to do this, because there is a kind of intrinsic risk around just general contact and the way your victim hub would work. So actually, it is more focused in the public protection teams to make sure victims are kept up to date, supported, appropriate referrals are made, and the matter is progressed, if that makes sense. I think it's more in the public protection space for this.
But isn't that the way in dealing with this issue? I mean, we've drifted, no reason why, because they're very important issues we've discussed. But if we're focusing on young people coming into it, there are different issues that come into play that professionals, both in terms of prevention and support issues, need to be there. And you as police officers, enforcement, we need that degree of sophistication in terms of the people that we're dealing with at that age. I mean, it could be a very young age, could be young adults in that sense. Are we really... are we that sophisticated with inside the police service, or are we putting too much pressure on you in terms of delivering that? And are we going to see mistakes made, and maybe we need to face up to that but try to eradicate and minimise those mistakes?
Well, we try our very, very best, but when you're right around young people in particular, that's where you need to have those close relationships with other partners, enter into multi-agency meetings to discuss the risk, to make sure that actually we look at it holistically, find a longer-term solution that will stop the offending or protect the victim. You're absolutely right. That's why in public protection teams you've got, I guess, specially trained officers who are trained to deal with child abuse cases, to deal with young people, to support those multi-agency initiatives. So you're absolutely right. It's particularly in that space you need effective multi-agency arrangements, because there are things, in terms of outcomes that those agencies can provide that we cannot, that would be far more effective. So we are trained to do that. We have those relationships day to day, but it is sophisticated, it is complicated, it truly is, and it is very challenging, and everyone's an individual.
Chair, we may be, in terms of following up in written questions, talk about some of that degrees of the separation between if we were dealing with adults and younger folk in following up in a written
We'll follow up on that. Colleagues, we are running really late now, so can we pick up speed? And if I can ask you kindly to keep your answers to the minimum. Thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Question to the Met. How is the Met strongest ever neighbourhood programme prioritising work to prevent VOG and protect young people affected by VOG?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question, but just because our neighbourhood teams are so closely aligned with the communities that they serve. Part of the VOG action plan in the Met, we've developed tactics that can be deployed by neighbourhood teams. So walk, talk and do's, for example, is one of those. It's about building really good relationships with the public and understanding where women feel safe and where they don't feel safe, working with partners to make them feel safer. We talked a little bit around nighttime economy, some of the work that our neighbourhood teams are, it's called Vigilant, which is an overt and covert response to risk, not only in the nighttime economy, where they can target predatory offenders. We talked about behavioural detection officers as well within that. They perform a really, really important role and work very close with our proactive teams as well.
Thank you. And also, and I think this is probably part of the children's strategy, how are you ensuring that child exploitation cases are dealt with by specialist teams as opposed to local investigating teams?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was definitely a gap. We had small teams that were supporting in sexual exploitation cases, and criminal exploitation cases were sitting within our local investigation reactive teams. We've uplifted our exploitation teams by 72 across London, so now we've got larger teams with more resilience who are able to pick up all exploitation of children.
Sorry, Chair, could you just tell us what the process would be then? Just, how does that work?
Yeah. So at the moment, across London, the criminal investigation will sit within either a RASO investigation team or a normal CID investigation team. But the safeguarding will take place within one of those exploitation teams, and they also focus on the perpetrators as well. What we find is by selecting the right officers to do that work, they're better able, they've got the best skills to build that rapport with the young person and understand some of the dynamics and put the best intervention in place in support of them.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Best.
Thank you. Just turning to our Met colleagues to ask about the Met's VORG engagement plan for London. When do you think that would be published? And also, is there anything that you've picked up from the work in putting that together so far you'd like to share with the committee?
We've done a lot of work and engagement, so in pulling together our VORG strategy across different sectors, across different partners, to pull together our VORG commitments and engagement strategy. But the things that we've actually made progress on are things like the IAG, delivering aid and IAG with expertise, independent advisory group to support and help us. We've got victims forums. We've got, obviously, with the neighbourhood policing, community meetings. We've got lots of...
Sorry, could we speak to the VORG engagement plan, just on when that will be published? Sorry, I'm just aware.
Sorry, VORG engagement plan?
Yeah.
In terms of the VORG engagement plan, that is how we've actually built our... We've engaged and we've built our strategy. Which factor are you referring to? Sorry.
So the VORG engagement plan was something as part of the strategy that was promised to be published. It's not yet published, so I'm just wondering when it will be.
Are you talking about the MOPAC one?
No, this is through the Met's VORG. It's the Met's VORG engagement plan.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of wider engagement across the VORG sector, so we do engage. We've got the IAG, we've got the scrutiny panels, we've got the victim voice forum as well. So in creating the VORG action plan for the Met, there was a lot of engagement, and we do continue to engage with the public.
Can I just go, so the VORG's engagement plan, is that a document that's in existence or that you believe is going to be published? It seems like
we're looking
perhaps
more...
it's not something that you are
No,
aware
it's
of.
not something I recognise in terms of... Because we did our engagement to create our strategy, and a part of that strategy is obviously engagement within that, but we're looking more holistically now at our engagement generally across communities through the neighbourhood policing lens as well. And that's where we're driving, but happy to come back and back to you on that if I've missed a point there.
Yeah, I think that you will have to get somebody to come back to us on this, because obviously there was an engagement plan that was going to be published.
Okay.
If the directional process has changed and the engagement is happening in a different way, then perhaps I think that would be better explained in writing.
Happy to come back to you on that, but certainly that's how we created our strategy, was through our engagement, and we had a very clear approach to that. And of course, ongoing engagement through the IAG, community groups and so forth is ongoing, but we'll come back to you if...
because obviously we're interested in the engagement plan that was supposed to be published being published, and of course if there's a change to the process, then that's understandable, but it seems like the dots aren't quite connecting.
We'll come back to you with absolute clarity.
I think so. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll make sure we write to you to where we've got the information from, because all of this is done on deep research. So we'll let you know where it's come from, and then perhaps you can assist us.
That'd be fabulous. It's not something I recognise.
No, fair enough. Well, we'll find where we've got it from and write to you. Thank you for that. We're now moving on to education and prevention, and that's going to be started by...
Chair, if I could say, if it is at all helpful, I know where it's from. But it's from the Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan published in December 2023, and that's where there was a promise from the Met to publish an engagement plan for London in collaboration with the VORG sector. Okay. It's something we brought up in our previous meeting with stakeholders as well, and just that's where that comes from.
No, thank you, and we'll come back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that. Good. OK, so now we're going on to education and prevention, and Assemblymember Garbutt's going to start off.
So it's a general question about, is enough being done to tackle misogynistic attitudes developing in young children in schools, and what more is needed? And I just wanted to include in that something we heard from the last panel, which is about the prevalent rape culture. So you described as normalising violence, banter and minimising rape, and just if we're doing enough to address that. But the question, is about addressing it and for young people in schools. Should I start with Lib? Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, great, thanks. I mean, this is obviously a kind of key area for us. Given time, I'm not going to go back on stats I've already referred to in terms of healthy relationship work and the 20,000 young people we're reaching. I think I might use this slot just to maybe emphasise the importance of online harm and how we've really taken that as a key priority for the VRU going forward.
That does come in later, and
I will be brief because I do appreciate
very brief.
Yeah,
please,
no, sure. So we did a really good piece of research work with Catch-22, which was encapsulating the views of young people. That was about 18 months ago. We started working with Social Switch programme, which is training, which we've trained over 2,000 youth practitioners and some parents as well on the dangers of online harm, which many of the young people reflected was a problem. And we're just about to embark on some research work where we've been involved in roundtable discussions with academics and other key partners in this field, because how the online environment provokes real life violence is something that we need to find out a lot more about, and it's obviously fast moving, so young people are going to be sort of baked into that proposal and helping us develop it. So that has been a key element also of our education, as well as a lot of school stuff that I've already spoken about.
Great, thank you. Just generally what's happening to address misogynistic attitudes in young children?
So in a general sense, we're looking at what we're doing next around campaigning, but the two campaigns, one which we've mentioned already, Say Mate to a Mate, and Have a Word, are still very, very relevant. Also, our campaign on FGM, which is a targeted campaign to particular communities, that's also really relevant, and we resurrected that again, International FGM Day, to tackle misogyny in that sphere. We're also working with Tender as well, who and it complements the work that the VRU has commissioned. Ours is more supporting teachers to have conversations in the secondary school environment and in the primary school environment. So we have a VAW prevention toolkit aimed at teachers. We're also working with academics as well on the online space. I think for us, what we're trying to do is sort of to adjust. It's very, very fast-paced, the online world, and what we're discovering is that there is no distinction between this world and the online world, especially for young people. So it's trying to sort of look at VORG in the round, but the tech-enabled abuse is quite prolific and comes in many different forms, through things like, just apps, location apps, things like that, but also through appliances. You think about people being controlled through their, I know it sounds ridiculous, but through their fridge, through their hearing aids, through their heart monitors. I mean, it's really quite severe what's going on in the tech-enabled world. And then obviously you've got things like virtual reality, and you're having people getting raped in the metaverse. And what does that mean? Legislation needs to catch up. So there's a whole body of research that needs to happen around tech-enabled VORG for young people, but also for everyone, because people are getting financially abused online, and they're not necessarily in the young person's sphere. So we're working with VRU and others to make sure that everybody's aligned on this. There's bits of work going on across City Hall looking at tech abuse generally, but our focus is very much on VORG. So we'll make sure that there's that alignment.
Well, that's really interesting to hear. And do you feel like the scale of the stuff supporting teachers is at the right level in that engagement?
It could be more, to be honest. The unfortunate thing is all of this could be more and does need more, but you're working with a finite level of resource, and you do what you can to make sure that goes as far as it possibly can.
Thanks. I think Liv wanted to come back in.
I just wanted to come in on the schools picture, because I think it is really important that we don't just segment our work and ask more and more of teachers, because what we get back constantly is there are a lot of different programmes, a lot of different projects, and that's one of the inspirations behind us doing the Inclusion Charter, which is really trying to tease out best practice that's going on across London, and it feels like, you know, that becomes a framework both for policy advocacy and recognising the big things that are happening across London, online being one of them, but that we're able to reflect then a different borough's pressure and they can share their best practice experience, because although education is absolutely fundamental, there's only so much I think teachers can do and are able to do. So we've got to kind of give them the scope to be able to, we've got to be able to give them the tools to address the things that they might find difficult, and online is absolutely certainly one of those, but it's got to be done in the framework of something that doesn't A, feel onerous, and B, makes sense across a whole range of issues, I think.
Yeah, that's really clear. Did anyone from the Met want to come in just on the schools picture?
Comment on that one. So we had a youth summit in December, which was really strong. That impacted 187 students across 25 different schools. Lots of discussion and content around misogyny, trying to improve reporting levels as well. We've delivered 243 presentations in schools, which amounts to between 15 and 20,000 students and, as we discussed here, teachers that have attended that, looking at issues such as exploitation and extremism as well. And there's a new campaign being launched in August 2025, which is called the Back of the Door campaign, which will raise awareness around abusive behaviours and, again, around increasing confidence to report.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Right.
Thank you. And Jane, I'm so thrilled to hear that we're looking again at FGM. It's something that just constantly, you know, we start and then it disappears, and clearly it's not disappearing, and there's nowhere near enough charges. So, you know, I really commend you for doing that again. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you very much. So, there we are. This is to everybody, but please, in view of the time limit that we have, please don't feel the urge to duplicate what's already been said. Research suggests that women with special education needs and disabilities are at greater risk of sexual assault and violence. What specific steps or training are you taking to prioritise and support young people with special educational needs and disabilities who are affected by VORG? At least one of you, anyway. Shall I start with, so if the Met want to kick off, and then maybe MOPAC after that, if that's okay. Yeah.
I'll talk generally and then just bring Angela in. But around when victim survivors come forward and they have, we train our officers who investigate these offences on the best way to support and achieve best evidence. So, through video interviewing, through how you question, how you get to the evidence in the right way. So we do a lot, and that's always been the case and ever improving, that we've got that fundamentally built into investigative interviewing, training and assessments. So if you need to bring a professional in, a medical professional or other, to support that interview, we do so. That's part of police doctrine, has been for quite a long period of time, but ever improving. If I bring Andrew in a bit more, some more specifics, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a challenge. We rely on intermediaries to support the evidence gathering phase, where we've got a victim with particular special needs. Sometimes there can be delays in accessing intermediaries, and that impacts the feelings, I should imagine, by the victim, and also the progress with the case. So it's really important that we've got sufficient provision. And it goes to something Jane was talking about earlier around provision in general being the right quality and really targeted to particular needs of the victim as well. So, but yeah, we absolutely train our officers in the best ways of gathering evidence in those cases.
Thank you. MOPAC, Jane, do you want to go?
So we look at it from the terms of support to victims and survivors. So we are working, with organisations that are specialists in this area. So we work with organisations such as Stay Safe East and Respond, and they have a really good track record of supporting victims and survivors of all ages, but definitely young people as well, who have experienced violence, crimes associated with violence against women and girls.
Thank you.
And ours would be through a prevention lens and thinking about some of the characteristics that emerge later on in picture of people who've been more exploited, and therefore thinking about how you sort of build that resilience in terms of the young person, but also actually thinking about how you change the system. And I suppose the earliest example of that we've got is recognising that communication issues for young people that are very evident in a primary school setting often manifest themselves in a secondary, often lead to an exclusion, and then you've got 1 in 2 prisoners actually who have been excluded from school. Thinking about that, and therefore doing oracy work in primary schools, which has got some really early effective impact, which we can share with the committee. Similarly, thinking about neurodiversity in school, which has a similar trajectory sometimes for young people, and in that way picking up some of the young people who have got special educational needs challenges, and thinking about how we can best support them, and doing a lot of training with professionals, be those youth workers or with teachers as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for all panel members. How are you working to ensure children in London are protected from harmful online sexual content at a young age?
So, shall I start? One of the key investments we've made recently is to increase our child abuse online investigation teams, essentially. So we put an additional 40 detectives into that because we recognise the growing kind of threat, the growing problems there. So we've invested in that directly to protect and to identify the subjects. But this is again a bit of a national crisis, really, in many ways, that we need to work quite closely with the NCA, government, and others to look at how do we, remove harmful content, how do we remove that exploitation online. There's far too much of it. It's vast, and actually you need a lot of help. Obviously, the government are looking at the online harms bill as well. But certainly it needs a whole system approach to it. But we've invested in investigating. Part of the conversation with schools is obviously about how to remain safe online as well. And actually, but as I say, it's a real challenge.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, 3 quick points, I suppose, all of which I've referenced before, but one of which is it's really important that we do the research on this so that we're keeping pace with the challenges. The second is we have, through Social Switch and Catch-22, done a lot of training, both with young people but also particularly with practitioners. And I do think there is that third bit of a collective voice around some of the real dangers that are enabled through social media, and that we're not yet keeping pace with some of the things that are happening. So there's an enforcement and advocacy piece there as well. And making sure, again, I think that the voice of young people is built into that as people who experience some of that harm. And we are so far from that as not a young group of people.
Yeah, just to sort of add to that, we are looking at how we protect, I suppose, women and girls in general, but everyone online, and thinking about different spheres of activity. So one of the things that we're looking at is the gaming industry, because we're getting a lot of intel that there's quite a lot of abuse that happens within that sector. I don't know if you call them a sector, but in that area. But we also would really love to be working more with some of these big platforms, such as Google, such as Meta. They have a responsibility to young women and, well, all women and girls, to ensure that the misogynistic content is taken down. So that is something that we're very keen to progress under this new strategy, working with colleagues across the GLA, including VRU and, of course, the Met.
I mean, we had a round table on that, actually, that the Deputy Mayor hosted, which we worked with an organisation called Tech UK, which is the trade body for UK tech organisations, who hosted the Deputy Mayor and us with a roundtable summit. We had Ofcom, we had tech companies, we had the Vorg sector. So this is specifically to talk about online Vorg. So I think, for us it's about, well, what is City Hall's role here? And I think that's exactly the type of thing we can really do and have some impact with.
I can come in very quickly with a very practical thing, just to follow on from previous sort of comments, really around upskilling police officers to investigate effectively. So we've increased the number of digital forensic practitioners in our organisation, and also digital media investigators, because it's a developing need, and we just need to make sure that our officers are skilled enough to actually offer the interventions when they're needed and required.
Thank you. Just one small further point, if I may, to both Will and Jane, because you mentioned the convening power of the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor and the voice which they have. You will have seen the reports yesterday and over the last few weeks regarding the murder of Carol Louise and Hannah Hunt, and the influence of Andrew Tate on the perpetrator. When it was reported yesterday on the radio news, Andrew Tate was simply referred to as a online social influencer. Is there more that the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor can be doing to ask, not demand, but to really strengthen the case for broadcasters to call these people out for who they are, and not to make them, sound so benign and
yeah.
innocent?
Yes, is the short answer to that. We are looking at ways that we can strengthen the messaging that's coming out of City Hall. And I know the Mayor is very keen to do more in this area. But it's absolutely ridiculous the way these people are characterised. Headlines such as "woman killed for nagging." No, she's been murdered by somebody, But when you get really ridiculous headlines like that, it is extremely upsetting, frustrating. So yes, we will continue to do what we can to make sure that call it out for what it is. These are not influencers, they're misogynists.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
I was just going to say, though, but if you kind of equate this to counter-terrorism, where you've got extremists online, what you have there are sort of the counter-narrative comes out, doesn't it? So we've got people out there and about who will come out with a counter-narrative to dissuade, to put the facts out there, and that's possibly what's missing in the Vorg space. Those sort of strong, we talked about strong role models and people who can come out and challenge Tate on his own turf, because we are very worried, to put it bluntly, about those influencers and those individuals and the influence they have. So there needs to be some kind of counter to this. Is it effective? Is it strong? No, it's not at the moment. I can't see it in the way that it should be. And you can equate it to terrorism in some ways. It's extremism, isn't it? And we should counter it in a similar vein.
Thank you for your answers. Yep. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to direct my questions to Lib Peck and then to Jane Lemon, if that's okay, unless someone really indicates that they want to come in. We've heard from Southall Black Sisters and Violence Against Women, also Tender, and everyone's invited in this investigation. And one of the things that was being very strongly said is about parents, and how important would you say, starting with Lib, it is to bring parents into early violence against women and girls prevention, and also the education work, and why?
Absolutely essential. I mean, if you're looking at key relationships in a young person's life, then the relationships they have with family members is key, isn't it? So, yeah, we recognise that, and throughout all of our strategy, we take a kind of whole family approach. Whatever form that family comes in, it's important that young person feels that they've got relationships with family members. I spoke earlier, and I don't want to therefore repeat myself, but the father's work we're doing is really interesting, and that came off the back of us investing in and supporting networks of parents across London, 20,000 parents were variously involved in that across all of the London authorities, London councils, and then we saw the prominence of women in those groups, and we heard from them about the absence of fathers in that space. So we did some work to understand what that was about, a phenomenon we'll all be slightly familiar with, but nonetheless, what was that about? And therefore, the father's work is looking at what the barriers are for men, thinking about the trauma they've experienced and making sure that they feel much more able to, in many senses of the word, able to work with institutions, and part of that is positive male role models, and I think that's what we keep touching on.
I mean, from what we were hearing from Tender and Everyone's Invited, who'd been running some workshops in schools that were free, they were actually having problems engaging with any parents, so not just the fathers or the uncles.
Yes.
They were running free workshops that literally no parents turned up to. Why do you think it is such a challenge to engage with parents around this whole area, and in particular to get them to understand what we were just discussing about the online malign influences that really small children are starting to see?
I mean, that isn't our experience, but I'm not saying that there aren't challenges about getting parents involved. I mean, I would want to look at whether it's where the workshops are being held. I think there is a big intimidation factor for some parents going into a school. There is sometimes a sense which we pick up that, you know, parents feel that they're asking for help in a school setting. They're more likely to be stigmatised. So there may be something about location. And there is obviously huge amounts of other pressures on parents that is going to divide their time. So I think that probably needs unpacking. But I definitely think that parents are important, and certainly we have a reach into those parents and could have much more reach into those parents. So I'd be interested in talking to some of the providers that you've obviously already spoken to.
Jane, if I can come to you, thanks for that, Lib. I mean, it was very clearly being expressed to us that there is an issue about engaging with parents to get them to believe at all what their children were seeing online and tech-enabled stuff. I mean, we were just referring to it now. Is that something that MOPAC, how are we tackling that?
That is an area that we should be doing more on, I'll be honest. But I do think, having speak fairly regularly to Everyone's Invited and to Tender, their experience is that some parents, it's all too difficult, I think, for some parents. They do find it a really difficult topic. I don't think it's that of course, they don't want their children to come to any harm, but to be faced with these are the sorts of things that your child could be picking up online, that's a difficult thing for them to confront. And it's just hard getting some of them to engage because of that. But I do think that it's not because they're not willing, it's because it's hard. It's a very, very... VOG is not easy, let's put it that way.
Sorry, can I just very briefly come back? Because I do sometimes think we under-emphasise the importance of the messenger and the location. And I think it was some point that Len was trying to get at earlier on about kind of the role of the sort of adult, trusted adult in making sure that, a young person might speak to them before they'd go to the police. I think there's something about that we need to do a lot more consciously. It's something we've done in the VRU with working with those kind of frontline community organisations that have a link with parents and therefore can encourage them to come along rather than putting on a programme at a school and expecting parents to come into it, which I think sets up all sorts of different barriers. So I think there's how you look at that access is quite important.
OK, so it's not just the messenger, it's also the location that we're talking about. So looking at the police, are you the right messenger in any location to be engaging with parents about this really difficult area, given the barriers that we've just been talking about? And is that something that you're doing? Do you see it as part of your role? So
in terms of engaging with parents and communities, part of our sort of local policing, neighbourhood policing, we would engage with parents. We would have, if people are concerned and they want to have those discussions. But we do recognise that we have got gaps in our expertise in these areas, and actually we might need to make the referrals to the right people who can provide appropriate advice, guidance, support. So you would probably find that our officers are out there day to day engaging around some of these conversations in schools with communities. Yes, it's just recognising where our expertise stops and others begins. That's really fundamentally important, and some of the Commission services and some of the other partners that we have, we can make those referrals, but it is our role to engage with concerned parents, communities, people, but also make the right choices around referrals.
It has to be a holistic approach from everybody, though. There's no point only engaging with teachers if you're not also engaging with the parents, and also the very necessary part of it, which is obviously to engage with the young people who are in the middle of all of this, some of whom don't have parents and are in the care system and have carers. And we also know that there is a propensity for children who've ended up in care to be more likely to end up being exploited. So are we doing enough to make sure that people involved in caring for children who are not necessarily, who are their guardian ad litem or the sort of in loco parentis, are we doing enough to engage with people doing that work?
We certainly engage on a pretty much a day-to-day basis, to be frank, because there's a link to missing people as well here. So we are engaged with care homes and then local authorities around those children all the time to try and solve those problems. And I think Ofsted have a role here, don't they, in terms of inspecting and making sure that the standards are there. But we do this as part of our sort of day-to-day, and we're working quite closely with care homes to try and reduce people going missing and try and reduce the vulnerability. But that truly is a partnership, as you say, holistic approach you've got to take. But recognise that.
Angela, did you want to come in as well?
Just very quickly, in follow-up from that, really, and thinking about what are the barriers to parents in attending some of those sessions. And we know language can be a barrier. We know other kind of social issues can be a barrier. And what we've learned through our Gwen tactic, which is our neighbourhood teams deploy girls and women engagement networks, is actually some of the best ways to build engagement is actually to go out into community groups that already exist, and that could be an opportunity to think about engaging more widely in online harm.
So peer engagement, you've found that is successful?
So I suppose this is around engaging with VORG groups. So generally it would be adult women, but it could involve younger groups. But I see what you mean, talking about peers, briefing other peers. Potentially that could be something.
That's really interesting, and certainly some of the boroughs out there have youth IAGs and youth engagement that is probably opportunities to consider and think about that further, so that's a good point.
And obviously talking about children who aren't living at home with parents in whatever shape the family might be but are ended up in the care system, we've also got children coming from school and going into colleges, and there appears to be some evidence that coming from school and being in college can also be a more difficult environment. So let's say 16 to 19-year-olds. Are there, is the Mayor specifically prioritising commissioning support for young people who are in those circumstances? And I'm looking at Jane at this point.
So we have a range of support over many different forms of VORG, and most of those forms of support pick up anywhere from 13 upwards, perhaps even younger on certain services. So I would say there is a broad range of provision when you're looking at all forms of VORG that we offer. But I don't know if there's anything extra that you wanted to sort of glean out from that question.
I think it was about in the actual location in the colleges that there was a concern that there might be more support for teachers in schools but possibly less in the college situation.
Yeah, sorry, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say that we have focused as a unit a lot on the transition from primary to secondary and done less on secondary to college, and I think you're absolutely right. That is a key key thing that we're looking forward to trying to do more work around, because there is something about both the kind of physical transportation around violence that is an issue, but there is also where the peer group is then very, very dominant in those settings, and that's where we need to be much more engaged. I mean, we do run programmes and invest in partnerships up to the age of 25, because we do see that as young people, but I think that is something we could focus a lot more on.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. So we come to our last question, and it's to the Met. What are your reflections on Operation Encompass becoming a statutory requirement in the Victims and Prisoners Act, and how is the Met ensuring it meets its obligations under Operation Encompass?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it earlier. Obviously, we've got a very tried and tested set of processes around Encompass, which is supporting young people following a DA incident in the home. There are challenges with it. Our MASH teams are stretched. Some schools are more engaged than others, and we need to make sure that those interventions with those children, those young people, are timely and effective. But I think it's a really, really good programme of work, and we've got really good systems in place in the Met to deliver it.
I think broadly, though, and many of these things, it's about information sharing, isn't it? Across different partnerships, and schools being one of them, and that's an effective mechanism. So we do want to, you know, where we can, we want to make sure we share information to safeguard people, but we're supportive of it.
Who do you highlight it to if you get a college or a school that is just not playing ball? Who would you elevate that to?
So if we had difficulties, we'd probably be speaking to MOPAC colleagues around that as well. But you also have the local authorities that we can engage with. So there are a number of areas, but I'm sure often you can overcome a lot of these things through a sensible dialogue, but there are escalation points, MOPAC, local authorities, there are ways of doing, you know, of highlighting issues if we need to.
Sometimes schools just won't play ball, though. I've
they're all very
that.
different.
That's a very subtle way of putting it, yes. Did you want to come in there?
Well, I was just going to say, actually, some of the works we have done in colleges and in schools, it's limited, but actually, unfortunately, after a critical incident, and there have been a few in the last year where it's been really relevant in a school setting, we have a critical incident fund at the VRU, and we make sure then we work with the school. And in fact, in some of those instances, we've been able to fund and support a particular sort of therapy for some of the kids who've, you know, been either close to the victim or indeed seen things that they've, you know, absolutely horrific. So we do try and tailor it in that way, but that's obviously at the end of a situation we don't want to have happened, so most of our resources is earlier on, but we do want to prevent other incidents from happening as well.
Thank you. At the beginning of the meeting I said I'd come back and ask any of you if you've got anything specific to that you want highlighted to us, and then I'll come to my colleagues. Is there anything that we've missed?
Just at the very beginning, you talked about stalking and the increased prevalence of stalking. I think a lot of that is increased risk identification. We're getting better at understanding perpetrators and linking those offences together. You might see a stream of domestic abuse allegations taking place. We're just getting better at noticing what is stalking behaviour and putting those stalking protection orders in place where they're appropriate. We've got brilliant response in the Met called the STAC, the Stalking Threat Assessment Centre, which is multi-agency, and it's really, really effective in highlighting really risky, obsessive behaviours in offenders.
Which the committee are welcome to come and see.
I'm just going, that was my, can we come and see that? I'm sure the committee would be really interested in that. Did you, were you indicating no, he wasn't.
It's in Stratford Police Station, so you're very, very welcome to come.
That is very helpful, and we'll certainly arrange that because that's interesting. The only thing I've got to say is that I really like this V100. It's obviously working because you can pinpoint, and at some point I hope we come back to it so we can see how you replace the names on it. And I know one of my colleagues will be particularly interested in how people get named on that. But I applaud you for that. I think it's working well.
Can I just very quickly come in on that? There's a bit of a media push next week around the V100, so you might see some digital data and information coming out through that.
Excellent. Well, if you put anything on social media, I'm sure we'll enhance it, echo it and retweet or whatever we do. Well, that's what all I do, but other people do other things. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say, commend the committee really, because a lot of the focus when we talk about VOG, people just talk about domestic abuse and sexual violence, and it's good to see that there's people are understanding that there's a breadth to this.
Yes.
So I really don't want any of the harmful practices to get lost. You know, prostitution never gets talked about, and there are women that are really suffering underneath, you know, crimes associated with prostitution. So if, you know, in your work as Assembly members, if you are looking at tackling VOG, I would urge you to look across the breadth of VOG to make sure that you're really examining all aspects.
Thank you. And I repeat, I'm so pleased you're looking at FGM because that should not be dropped. Okay, I can't see any other anybody else wanting to say anything. So I would like to officially thank our guests for attending this morning and for their answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to agree the response to the Mayor's draft Police and Crime Plan 2025 to 29 as attached at Appendix 1 to the agenda report? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 26th of March 2025 at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3 City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.